LibertyNation.com does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
Twitter goes to the mattresses for free speech and privacy, and the Backpage trial is back on. Meanwhile, Clarence Thomas has a fake Super Bowl ring. All right now on this episode of The Uprising.
We are The Uprising.
Welcome back to The Uprising, a podcast of LibertyNation.com. I'm your host, Scott Cosons, and joining me today is LibertyNation.com senior political analyst, Mr. Timothy Elting-Donner. Tim.
Hello, Scott. Yes, always a guilty pleasure, as I like to say.
You say that, but I don't know why it's guilty. It should be just a guilt-free pleasure.
Because I get paid to talk, and, if I'm not getting paid, I'm still going to talk. So, that's like, it's like somebody once said, find something you like to do, and you'll never work a day in your life.
I want to encourage...
work some days.
I want to encourage everyone to I say this sometimes at the end of the show, but at the top of the show, Tim, to visit at Podcast Uprising at twitter.com, which I guess, are we supposed to call it X? But in any case, the URL is still twitter.com. I imagine he can't afford or didn't want to spend the dough for X.com. But in any case, now that Elon Musk has offered to pay the legal fees of anybody who gets dismissed or in trouble for tweeting, I think that the Uprising Twitter account's really going to, improve with some heat on it, you know what I mean? Yeah. How about you take the chains off,
And by the way, while you're on it, just as a quick bunny trail, I think it's important for our dear listeners and viewers to understand that for us as a site, LibertyNation.com, and all of the programming that stems from it, like this, the radio show, our C5,
the full suite of content that we're putting out there, you're saying?
It is so much easier for us to be able to get out our message under Elon Musk's Twitter or X than it was when it was controlled by the left. I mean, it's a significant.
Well, we're not throttled. We're just not throttled and censored. I mean, you say it's easier.
Simply not censored. I mean,
exactly. When they take the weights and the chains off the horse, they run faster. Tim, that's just.
Well, it's amazing the amount of time. There's a little bit of inside baseball, but it's probably fun for people to know a few things about how these kind of sites are run. That. The number of views that we get, hits that we get, simply by not being censored is very, very notable.
It's the world of difference,
and it's also caused Facebook and Instagram and the other sites to reconsider their own editorial.
And by the way, so for people who don't understand, you want to go, let's go even one layer deep to the onion. We pay these people money for advertising our wares. So it's not like, gee, why isn't Facebook giving us free stuff? It's like, hey, we're your customer.
Right.
And we're not saying anything except for a discussion of topics in the news that may be frustrating to establishment interests, but yet they don't.
Right,
That's how wedded they are to the ideology. That's how important it is for Zuckerberg to drive the narrative for the pro-establishment and pro-government narrative, that they don't want to take our money. Okay, that's
right. Our money is no good. Yeah, it's no good. Our money.
It's hilarious. I mean, they're supposed to be non-ideological.
It's because they don't need our money.
I'd like to see the shareholder derivative suit on that, by the way, Tim. Meaning, if you own Facebook shares, right? Did you buy Facebook shares to get shareholder value or to advance the notion that Hillary Clinton is the superior candidate to lead us all as president of the United States over her competition?
Obviously, the latter.
Okay, well,
I mean, you think so again with the mythical man who lands on planet Earth, having never witnessed anything before.
Right?
They would before Elon Musk have concluded that, oh, okay, this is one of those countries where the media is supposed to prop up the government it likes and attacks the ones that it doesn't. That, I guess, that's the role of the media.
Regime apologists
Yes.
and advance men. Well, let's talk about Elon's tweet real quick. He said, if you were unfairly treated by your employer due to posting or liking something on this platform, we will fund your legal bill, period. Next line, no limit, period. So
I mean,
that is a bold offer. Now, the thing is,
that's the freest of free speech you can possibly get.
or the costliest of exercise of free speech, meaning to fund the fight. You
Right.
know, if you were to attend law school, and I know, Tim, that you've honored yourself by not lowering yourself to that trade school
And
standard.
damn
Some
proud of
others-
it too, Scott.
Some
Yeah.
others have. You would learn in the first week of contracts law that to have a contract, the fundamental part of a contract when courts examine, is there a contract? Because believe it or not, some fair amount of contract laws to determine if there was in fact a contract in place.
Uh-huh.
And the key foundation for that is a meeting of the minds is the term of art that we use to discuss it. And you have to have a meeting of the minds for there to be a contract, whether it's for a sale of a house or an employment offer, or who knows what, any type sort of thing. And I just want to caution everyone before they go hog wild on the anti pistol brace tweets or whatever else they're into, that their work is going to censor them for it. This is not an offer by Elon Musk, which he can be then bound to pay for your bad employment lawsuit that you get from tweeting it out. So go ahead and contact him first before you.
I think the real danger, though, is that you're going to have people that will set themselves up to be persecuted for a post and then demand that
they will. I'll tell you what.
Deliberately, try to get themselves in trouble so they can get a cash payment from Mr. Musk.
He doesn't say a payment. He's going to fund the defense, right?
Well,
we will fund your legal bill, which, by the way, I mean, let's see when he starts stroking checks. That'll be one thing. Although he has evinced what's the right word? A reputation, an identity as stalwart free speech defender. So maybe this is just adding on to it. And hey, look, what's money for? If he does it to a few really high profile defendants, or that in this case they would be plaintiffs, that might be enough. If just like the Justice Department goes after big offenders for big settlements and lengthy sentences in order to send a message, well, guess what? Maybe Elon does it too, and he gets big money damages from a couple of tech companies or Hollywood studios, and puts everybody else in check.
Aren't Musk and Zuckerberg going to have like a mud wrestling?
Is that really going to happen?
I don't think it's actually mud wrestling.
Okay. I assumed it was just some trolling between the two of them. There was some talk on the platforms about them engaging in some pugilistic enterprise, but I don't know that it actually...
it's not going to actually be mud wrestling, but I think people would be most intrigued by that.
I agree.
Who would you favor in a boxing match between Musk and Zuckerberg?
I'm on team Elon. What he did with Twitter, I just can't.
Musk would be favored in a pugilistic battle.
I'm not capable of assessing that with a detachment.
You can't. So you can't handicap the actual.
No, I'm romantically involved in love for Elon and his free speech support. That's
Amen.
We need it. All right, let's go ahead and.
And by the way, that applies completely to the left too. This is not, just so people know, this is not where now Musk says, okay, now we're going to get back at people by censoring leftist stuff. This is, we're no longer simply going to censor right-wing stuff. We're not going to censor.
I couldn't abide by that.
Yeah,
I couldn't abide by that either, because many of my views would fall into that bucket. That's the thing that's so funny. It's like, I'm not a conservative, and I'm not. I mean,
but you are a free marketer.
Well, now
and I think,
now it's just become big state, and and not big state, which is kind of
pretty
interesting.
much.
We sort of moved into an interesting zone here.
Swamp and non-swamp.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, let's talk about the week that Mr. Trump had. We revealed, or it was revealed, that Jack Smith, speaking of Twitter, had a search warrant for Trump's Twitter account. And Twitter fought it. So this is where Elon's bona fides really come into play. Not only does he, say that he'll let you speak, basically, if you're not engaging in actual, true threats or real harassment. And by the way, real harassment, for people who don't know, it is repeated. So saying one thing one time about something can never be, harassing. It's an ongoing course of conduct. So he told the Justice Department to wait while they hired lawyers to fight the search warrant for Trump's Twitter account. Now, how do you search a digital account? Basically, what it does is the company's required to give them access to all the account information they have. I suspect, Tim, that this was to look at the DMs, which are like emails, for people who don't know, like private
Direct
messaging on
messages.
the Twitter platform. Yeah,
Right.
Both incoming and outgoing on Twitter that Trump may have had with any number of people. And of course, one of the things it may reveal, Tim, is, if you're a celebrity, like, how do you get to Donald Trump to talk to him? Meaning, like, if you're a really high profile, and by celebrity, I shouldn't use the word celebrity. If you're a person who has a ton of Twitter followers, and so you have a high public profile, you can leverage that to direct communication with other people with high profile, because it's a verification scheme. Like, in other words, how do you know that it's really Tim Donner messaging you? Well, if it's from his public Twitter account that has 6 million, I'm bumping you up a little bit there, Tim. I know that you're not a big social media maven, but then So my point is that now Joe Biden's appointed prosecutors, the ones that they flew in special from Europe to get Donald Trump, they now have access to Trump's private communication with anybody who he communicated with on the Twitter network via the DMing thing. Right. And we know for sure that the Department of Justice Special Prosecutors Squad, or people with access to the Special Prosecutor Squad information, leak information all the time to legacy media types, not to LibertyNation.com. We're not on the prosecutor leak list, but Washington's most prominent newspaper is, the New York Times is, and some others. So are they going to be discreet with the private, hurtful political information that they now have access to? Like they weren't discreet with the private legal information they had access to? Well, that seems like it would be, why would they turn that leaf? So that's what's going on. And Twitter, by the way, was ordered to pay, I think it was $300 or $350, I can't recall the total now, $1,000 for delaying their production of that evidence. And accompanying, by the way, there's a lot of details here, so sorry, I forgot. Another detail of the story is that there was a gag order that accompanied the demand for, so the search warrant comes, they say to Twitter, here's a search warrant, give us all Trump's information. By the way, here's a gag order also from the court. You can't tell anybody about this thing. And they say, we're going to wait. We're not giving you squat until we call our lawyers and fight this idea, A, that you get the stuff anyway. We think we're going to fight that. And B, that we can't talk about it. Fighting on both of those fronts. And it's an interesting thing, sort of procedurally, to me anyway, maybe not to anybody else out there, but the reason why they had to pay such a high price to him was that they didn't object when prosecutors said they didn't disclose the information that they were ordered to disclose. So they go to court and say, Your Honor, you signed this warrant and Twitter never gave us this info. And Twitter says, well, yeah, there's some problems with some of that info. We're fighting it. And the court says, well, let's see what we can do to make sure that you comply with our order. We're going to propose a fee schedule, a fine schedule. If you don't comply, we're going to fine you $50,000 a day and then double it every day. And that's what they did. And Twitter never objected to that thing. So then later on, Twitter says, hey, within a month and a half, this would be greater than the GDP of the world if we didn't that's the way this fine structure reads, right? That's how much it would be, because if
It's
it
like
doubles,
they say the greatest thing in capitalism is compounding interest.
yes,
And
the miracle of compounding interest. That's what Einstein said.
The same principle used against people that it's supposed to.
So if you're ever in court and you see somebody make an objection that likely is, you think maybe silly, or they're never going to grant that, one of the reasons why they might do so is to preserve that objection and get it lodged in the record. And so that's what didn't happen here. So anyway, Twitter paid over $300K and Trump's account. So if you DM'd him and gave him the recipe to mom's secret cookies, that's now in the hands of the Justice Department.
Well, and that ought to foist all sorts of lawsuits upon the Justice Department, because when you think about the stream of consciousness that Donald Trump displays on social media, I can't even imagine how many DMs he might have had. On the other hand, maybe there weren't that many direct messages, because most of his purpose in being on Twitter is to write stuff that everybody can see.
I bet there are
who knows?
A remarkable number of them, and I bet you that there's a small percentage of them, a very small percentage, but that have interesting political relevance to Biden's future office aspirations. And I wouldn't want to be, I will say this, though. I mean, this has to be said, that we're talking about digging down deep into the weeds of Donald Trump, that the Justice Department is committed to doing, so that anything they find can be indictable, whatever it takes, basically Stalinist justice. Show me the man, I'll show you the crime. And they've done it three times. That's Berea's line, I think, right?
Well, 3 times. Yes, you're right. His right-hand man. Three times they've done it, probably a fourth. But, things like this drilling down on the Twitter account, that just brings the issue of corruption or legal issues right to the fore again. And increasingly, the contrast between what they're trying to find out about January 6th, that single Capitol riot, is going to start to pale in comparison with the growing findings about the massive corruption for years by the Bidens, which I think
that has all been looked into, and those concerns were dismissed. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, I'm sorry. Never mind.
They clearly looked into.
Pay no attention. You can edit out that part of the show.
The President of the United States gave his word as a Biden, Tim. I don't know if you heard that, but that's what's happening.
And that is worth more than gold.
I saw that.
But seriously, I mean, these kind of cases with Jack Smith going as far as he's going, with the Justice Department going as far as they're going, with the Biden administration going as far as they're going. I mean, they set a standard that's going to, in one way or another, it's going to do an about face. Right? It's going to boomerang on them, because they want to bring up the destructive tendencies of Donald Trump and the growing body of evidence, which is only going to get more and more. It's going to be like Chinese water torture of the kind of things that the Biden family was engaged in. I think it could turn out to be, if it's done correctly by Republicans from a political standpoint, they will do what was done with Hillary's emails during the 2016 campaign, where a new embarrassing email came out, it seemed like every day during the heart of the general election campaign. If Republicans are smart, because there's such a mountain of evidence of influence peddling, the exact type of corruption that Donald Trump came to Washington to try and end, as he, by the way, never took a salary as president, right? The contrast is not going to stand well for the American people when they start to understand something that even Biden's Praetorian Guard in big media will not be able to avoid, which is just rank corruption and So I'm not so sure that all these legal troubles that Trump has aren't going to be largely compromised by the revelations about Biden, because it's still 15 months before the election. There's still a lot more to come, but it's hard evidence. Bank records, the creation of shell corporations where the only payments were incoming foreign cash. I mean, they can run, but even they can't hide from all of this. So without going down the bunny trail of the specifics of the latest Biden scandalous revelations, I think that the field is being leveled, I think, Scott, in terms of whether they think that they can paint Trump as uniquely corrupt or power hungry or authoritarian or whatever it is they want to claim about him.
Well, I saw that Graham J. Noble covered the deepening scandal for LibertyNation.com, Tim, the people's source for conservatarian news and analysis and the sponsor of today's podcast for the site. I do, however, have to say, of all the things that you just mentioned, I couldn't disagree more with your assessment that the Praetorian Guard press could somehow be overwhelmed with scandal to the point they would have to report critically upon the administration. I disagree with that emphatically and think that their capacity for swallowing behavior that flies in the face of their professed morals knows no bounds.
Well,
And
look,
all of the efforts are anti-democratic if they criticize the establishment, and they're pro-democratic if they somehow denigrate Trump or anti-Biden forces. Like,
well, and
F.
now look, the differences between here and 2020. In 2020, all they had to do was cover up for about 2 or 3 weeks before the election to say it was that the laptop was Russian disinformation. Pay no attention. It's all planted evidence or whatever, without ever denying that Hunter Biden in fact owned that laptop. But now we have 4 years worth of investigations, really a year less than that, because Republicans have only been controlling the House since the beginning of 2023. So, I think
they're going to put their shoulder to the wheel.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah, for real. Let them. They're Ivy Leaguers. They're going to get to work. We'll see what happens, but I expect more.
It's pretty
more
hard
apologies.
it's pretty hard to cover all this stuff up for another 15 months.
Yeah, well,
I mean, as opposed to just having to do it for 2 weeks at the end of the 2020 campaign, when everybody agreed, we can't let Trump be reelected. Can't allow that to happen. So we'll just bury something that, by the way, I've said this before, but it's worthy of restating, that at least one, I think it's more than that, poll of people who were not aware at all of the Biden laptop scandal revealed that Trump would have won, and would have probably won handily, in the swing states that he lost so narrowly. I mean, he lost the election essentially by 40,000 votes in 3 states. And the research has shown that if people knew just the basics of the laptop scandal in 2020, Trump would have won. So
I always like this question, and it's sort of like a gotcha question that I've heard posed. Has been posed to me, which is, was the election stolen? And my answer is not in the way that Trump says it was.
Yes,
but yes.
Exactly. Yes. Here's how I call
just
it.
like you say, and that's the laptop story. That's the other stories that.
Well, here's how I term it. I said that the Democrats stole it fair and square.
Yeah.
Because politically, they were brilliant in pouncing on the pandemic to get voting laws changed and relaxed. Signature verification getting thrown out. Just an endless stream of ballots that were like practically airdropped. So, that they took advantage of the voting laws.
Tim, please don't use Apple terminology, exclusive Apple terminology on the podcast.
Why? What did I use?
AirDrop.
Oh, excuse me.
That's an Apple file.
But they stole that from the English language. But, I mean, they they had this won before anybody voted on election day. There's a number of things we could discuss, but again, that's another bunny trail. The point is that you're right. It was stolen before election day through unconstitutional changes to state voting laws and relaxation of standards, which was custom made for the Democrats, because of course, with their community organizers, they're able to basically round up countless thousands of ballots in urban areas which lean heavily left. So yes, they stole it fair and square.
Just a Palace Guard example from this week. I wasn't really going to talk about it, but it fits so well with the discussion of their narrative seeking, which is that there's been this push. I think a conspiracy that's not organized, just everybody walking in the same direction without agreeing to do so, to attack Clarence Thomas for any and everything. And there was this story about the Super Bowl ring. Do you know about this?
I don't.
So the story was that Jerry Jones gave him a Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl ring. And as a lifelong Philadelphia Eagles fan, I'll reserve editorial comment.
Nauseous.
I'll reserve editorial comment about Justice Thomas's taste in awful, disgusting, horrible football teams. Okay?
No, you're not going to say that the Cowboys are disgusting, horrible,
I'm not going to say anything
evil
about
incarnate.
Those awful people and
you're
those
not
who
going
root
to
for
say
them.
that.
Certainly
right.
not.
Mm-hmm.
But so that was just reported, a straight report, and then like the valuations came in like $80,000 with the diamonds and the gold, irrespective of like the, that it's a Super Bowl ring and how much value. And then later on, it just came out it's a replica. So even if it was an actual, I don't think they make them in real gold, by the way. So it's probably like $25 worth of Chinese pot metal.
Those replicas are good too. My son has
look cool. Yeah,
my son has a replica of the Washington Nationals 2019 World
We're going to talk about his judgment with respect to that team too. But in any case,
well, you can not root for the Nationals, but it's hard to hate them, Scott.
That's true. No.
Nobody
not like the Cowboys. No,
nobody could achieve the level of hatred that is spawned by the Cowboys, because it's not just Philly fans.
No, it's a moral problem,
and it's Washington.
That alone, actually, that's the bigger story about Justice Thomas, I think, rather than this. But anyway, so it comes out, it's a fake ring, and that didn't get to above the fold treatment like the original ring story did, as you might imagine.
It's so transparent. They're so frustrated by the sort of unshakable conservative majority on the court, essentially 6-3 or 5-3-1, depending on how you look at it, that they've now have to resort to desperate means. I mean, all this stuff about Thomas was true. If it's true now, it was true years and years ago, but in a closely held court, closely divided court, they didn't bother with it. Now they have to go to basically trying to destroy Thomas's reputation with information that essentially has been the same for years on end. And now, of course, the chickens are coming home to roost, because Sotomayor has had her own issues, shall we say, and that could neutralize the left's assault on
When she does it, it's different. Because she supports, when she does it, it's different. She votes to uphold Roe v. Wade, Tim. So when she takes money, it's not for evil. But let's go ahead and...
once again, I apologize and say, never mind, forget that. You can edit that part out of the show, too.
Let's move along and go ahead and discuss some other political matters here that we featured on site on, once again, the sponsor of today's podcast, LibertyNation.com, Tim, where I read with interest your Yes, Virginia, Glenn Youngkin could beat Joe Biden. Now, at the top of this podcast, at every show and in other productions as well, we mentioned that LibertyNation.com is put on by a 501c3 that doesn't allow for endorsing candidates or issues. And while the people who discuss these issues may have their preferences. As an organization, there's none to be divined because none exists. With that said, boy, Tim, I thought, are you going to seek some kind of zoning variance for a patio or something that you're writing such a love letter to Glenn Youngkin and his potential candidacy for office?
God, I would refer you, Scott, to my title, which is analyst. Analyst, senior political.
It's all clinical. It's all clinical. Then there was no
all clinical. There's no
nothing
personal. I have no personal views.
You're not trying to get like a.
I'm totally neutral on every single issue.
Okay.
I have no opinions, just analysis. No, but here's the thing. Here's the way I would put it. If Trump were not around, if he had retired or he wasn't running again, and Glenn Youngkin was in the race, which I think
current governor of Virginia. I guess we should just set the table for people. Limited to one term. Virginia, you can only serve 4 years as governor. So historically,
you can technically serve more than 4, but not consecutively.
It's just it's not done. Yeah, generally.
But that's relevant because Terry McAuliffe was governor, then sat out for 4 years and tried to come back in 2021, and Glenn Youngkin beat him in a big upset and has since opened a lot of eyes. Now, let's put it this way. If Trump was not there, if Trump didn't exist or wasn't running or retired, I feel quite confident in saying that Glenn Youngkin would probably win the Republican nomination because he's the most attractive.
Seriously?
To the greatest number of people. Yes, because he has a relatability and amiability.
DeSantis has been getting an ocean of national press for months and months and months.
Unfortunately for DeSantis, it's only made his numbers drop. I mean, in March, as late as early April, he was even with Trump. Now he's 40 points behind. Now, how much of that is simply the prosecutions of Trump?
I think it's battle lines, right? Like you got to. Right. To me, that's what makes sense about it. When I see the Biden administration using the novel application of seldom used criminal laws to prosecute his likely chief rival for office and general election candidate, that pushes me to support Donald Trump in a way that nothing that Trump ever said can bring me to support Donald Trump. I feel like I want to keep out Darth Vader and his empire from the keys to power rather than fearing turning over those keys to somebody who may be, less than ideal. And I say that the understatement.
You put it this way, my enemies are my friends, kind of. It's like a default belief among so many Republicans that they are now called to support Donald Trump, whether they would have supported him before or not. I think that's true, and there's no way to overcome that. And it's pretty hopeless for DeSantis because you could say, well, things could change. Really? How much could they change? How much more could be thrown at Trump than 3 indictments and likely a 4th coming up in Georgia? In other words, this is one of the few cases where you could say absent illness or death. It's hard to envision any way that Trump does not get the nomination because everything's been thrown at him and he's 40 points ahead.
If he's guilty of the criminal act of lying about, what did he lie? He lied about whether or not he won the election, right? That's the criminal charge, one of the criminal charges. If he lied about that and is guilt and he can be prosecuted for that, Tim, you say, what else can you throw at him? Well, I'm positive that Donald Trump has lied about all manner of things in addition to, or not, excuse me, not in addition to, because that presumes that he did lie about that election thing. So taking the election out of it, has Donald Trump lied? I think the answer to that question is yes. And I would imagine we're going to see more prosecutions. If he can be prosecuted for lying about one thing, why can't he be prosecuted for lying about all manner of things?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's open season. And I think, though,
remember when he said he had a perfect phone call with the Ukrainian guy? Yeah. Well, what if he didn't even believe that was perfect, Tim? What if he believed that it was merely excellent and not perfect? And there's evidence to suggest it. Maybe he sent an email to somebody that said it was an excellent interview and not perfect. Is that a lie that can be prosecuted now?
Well, the justice system is pretty thorough in this country, but one thing they've never been able to master is examining someone's mind to determine with certainty their motives, right? Or their thinking, their reasoning.
Maybe Trump will be
whatever
the
it is. But I'll tell you what, the way they're going after him, I think it was pretty clear all along that they were doing this because it was basically a scheme to lure Republican voters into doing just what you said, which is to jump to Trump's defense and support him, even if they prefer another candidate, on the principle that you cannot prosecute a guy out of running for president, especially when it's, especially when it's with such blatant bias and so determined single-mindedly to get him. But the problem is now they're seeing that first part of that scheme is working. Republicans are, in fact, flocking to Trump. The problem is for them the second part of that scheme, because Trump is now tied with Biden virtually in the Real Clear Politics average. He's won some polls by as many as 5 points. Trump has recently. Biden's won a few others. It's basically dead even. I think they were pretty much sure that would not be the case. Now, if you take what's happening with Biden and the slow drip of revelations, the kind that killed Hillary Clinton in 2016, I think the Democrats now are shaking in their boots because I can't even imagine what Trump will do, the rampage he will go on if he does, in fact, win the election. Scott, I think it's fair to say that the swamp will never be the same because he will turn.
Yeah.
One of the things that Trump has proposed specifically is to turn thousands of careerist jobs in the swamp bureaucracy into political appointments. He's going to try to do that for thousands of positions, and this will effectively take out all the left-wing establishment bureaucrats. I won't even say left-wing, I'll say establishment
So for
bureaucrats.
people who don't know, they're not political appointments now, but they are jobs that are, everybody kind of assumes and believes that they're filled by lefty folks. Maybe not motivated movement lefty folks that like animate their lives by it, but like, you work for a big government program at a big government agency, you're pretty much usually in support of, big government. You're not working to try to minimize expenditures and outlays of the federal government.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean,
I don't think, Tim, I think that they will do everything and anything, and I mean the fullest extent of those words, to keep Donald Trump from becoming president of the United States, because it's an existential problem for them.
Haven't they already demonstrated that?
Yeah.
I mean, we're 15 months before the election, and to say they haven't done everything to try and bring him down is to simply ignore everything that they have done.
I mean, I'm waiting for the pre-dawn raid with the SWAT team where when he's at home and shots are fired or something like that. Like I'm prepared for more. Where do we go from here? What's already been done, just because it's on paper, don't think it's not as outrageous as that.
I wanted to bring up a recent statement by one of your favorite people in the world, Doris Kearns Goodwin.
He is a delight.
The infamous historian who essentially said what we've all basically known in recent days. She said, essentially, look, whatever it takes, we have to do whatever it takes to make sure this man is never
Wait a minute.
in the White
She's
House
just an
again.
academic, Tim. She's not an interested, motivated political actor.
I mean, literally nothing is off the table when it comes to taking down Trump. The question is whether they can actually do it. I mean, because to what extent can you control the voters' behavior? I mean, people are already fatigued by Trump scandals. I don't think anybody is shocked at anything anymore. The shock value is gone. The January 6th shock value is gone. I just don't know whether as has been the case so far, that every single effort to silence Trump and to tamp him down and to get rid of him has only made him more popular. Now, maybe that it's a perfect diabolical plan to get Republicans to nominate someone who's unelectable. But increasingly, that doesn't really appear to be the case.
They played with those matches before and they got burned, right? For people who don't know, I love this, by the way. I love to kind of remind everyone of this. Donald Trump is who he is now politically, in no small part to the Clintons, and the Clintons getting the media to elevate Donald Trump so that he would be the nominee for them to fight against, thinking that they would have an easy time beating Donald Trump.
Now, you think about things too, Scott, okay? Paradoxically, Trump, if you consider that in 2016, Trump was 100-to-1 shot when he entered the race. In 2020, he was handling a once-in-a-century pandemic, which I don't think any sitting president could have been reelected. And this time, he's even 15 months out in the polls. He's actually better positioned for the presidency than any time in his life. And on top of that, I think he will work on getting people to take themselves back in time to March of 2020, at which point, the economy was roaring. Everything seemed hunky-dory, shall we say, on the American economic front, and we hadn't been in any wars. We had peace and prosperity, to put it mildly, or to put it succinctly, I should say. Now you have the direct contrast of those years with Trump, and I don't think anybody's going to hold the fact of the pandemic against him. And now you have 4 years of Biden in reality, not just in theory or in principle. Now you have to look at the state of the economy, the state of consumer confidence, among other things. You look at the border, you look at the crime crisis that continues to exhaust, law enforcement in cities across the country. Now you've got a record to run against. I think that those matches you referred to and getting burned, I wouldn't bet a whole lot on their chances of victory at this point, because to be honest with you, I am, even before these indictments, I'm really kind of shocked at the continuing popularity of Donald Trump in spite of everything that happened at the end of his last administration.
Well, let's say hypothetically it's Glenn Youngkin versus Ron DeSantis, and Glenn Youngkin wins the primary for the Republicans. Is that what your political analysis is presently?
Well, not only do I believe that to be true, I believe it very firmly, because Youngkin is a guy without any real liabilities. I mean, look, this is a guy, including, by the way, his political savvy. This is a guy, Youngkin, who was, he was a rookie in 2021. He'd never run for office before, and he ran, by all accounts, got a flawless campaign for governor and beat Terry McAuliffe. There were some self-inflicted wounds, like him saying that
horribly corrupt candidate, much like Hillary Clinton, I think. Just
he's in the same. He's just in that same whirlwind. In that same, he's completely in the Clinton circle. He's a product of the Clintons. He's the closest ally, probably the closest political ally of Clinton to this day, of both Clintons. So uh, I'm sorry, I lost my.
I'm sorry, I put it off to you on it.
We were saying, yes, but Youngkin.
You were saying how committed you were to the to your analysis that Youngkin would be the
yes,
the primary winner.
Yes, because he has no real downside, and he has in sports, like in baseball, they talk about
with the baseball again. Here
a player who has and it's true with any football player too. You have a floor and you have a ceiling. The floor is what's the worst that could happen with a guy, and the ceiling is how high could the guy possibly soar. And Glenn Youngkin is a guy with a high floor, very high floor, and a very high ceiling.
Sorry, I was coughing there. Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate
look, I think DeSantis. It's worthy of noting that DeSantis has not run a good campaign. That doesn't mean that it's his fault that he's fallen this far. But
yeah, well, Tim, you're not. Let's not get into the thing where we have to say a good thing about somebody just for the sake of saying it. Like, no, you haven't said that, and I don't think that. And I actually think, by the way, I'm no political.
Well, I don't have to say something nice about him so much as to say
this is still the best. By best, I mean,
well, look,
from a voter perspective, I think he's the number 2 choice after Trump.
Well, I'm just going to say this, that it's, I'm not doing this just to sort of balance off what I said before. I'm saying it because it's important to note, usually when a guy's support drops precipitously, you assume that he's made a series of mistakes.
Yeah.
Now, he has made some mistakes, not the least of which it was his rollout, which was a technological disaster. But most of this is not his fault. Most of it is simply, again, that sentiment that you expressed earlier among Republican voters that if they're going after Trump, I'm pretty much duty bound to support him.
All right. Exit question on the topic. What percentage of DeSantis's decline is attributable to the disastrous rollout that he had with Twitter and the conversation with Musk?
Probably a quarter of it.
Wow. Big. Okay. Let's talk
because
about
it just sends a not ready for prime time, right? It sends that signal.
Yeah. Let's talk about another federal court case that I think it's important to discuss because of the issues involved and the issues that Donald Trump is confronting with his prosecution, and the way that the Department of Justice does its business needs to be addressed by our political class, Tim. And I think that while there's all the blame in the world to go around, Republicans do bear a special burden here because of their long history of kind of being more supportive of law and order types, that there is, they have a special duty to correct, I think, abuses. It's upon all the elected class, but boy, I feel like there needs to be some kind of come to Jesus moment where we recognize, not just in the case of politically elected people like Donald Trump, but in other issues where politics are at play, they've got a problem. I'm talking here about the Backpage trial, which if you think, gee, Scott, didn't we have that Backpage trial a few years ago? Well, there was one a few years ago, but
like, geez, Scott, we did this story years ago.
Yeah, right? Well, so Backpage was created by two people, James Larkin and Michael Lacey, as alternative weeklies. And what they were wildly successful, and financially what they built their empire on were sexually suggestive classified advertisements. Now, the government has alleged that they were ads for prostitution and that Lacey and Larkin illegally benefited from, selling ads for prostitution in their publications. And they've argued that, the universe of commercial sexual activity that falls short of prostitution, that is legal, was wide enough for them to make all this money, and that they didn't actually support prostitution with running ads for it. Now, what's interesting is in the federal criminal trial, and by the way, so this is in the news because the trial is going to start later this month, and it was actually scheduled to start this week, but it was delayed because James Larkin committed suicide, Tim, on the eve of trial. This was the second federal criminal trial for all manner of trafficking and money laundering and some other crimes. Now, the interesting thing is how the crimes come about. So for the money laundering, Tim, some attorneys general who didn't like what these people were doing with their lives and how they were making money decided to cut them off at the knees from credit card processing. So what they did was they sent letters to the credit card processors. Now, you imagine you're the attorney, you're the general counsel for, MasterCard Visa Bank of Kenosha, blah, 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 right? And you get a letter from the attorney general of such and such state that says, we think that you may be aiding and abetting human trafficking by doing business with these people, and basically encourage you not to do so, and maybe a subpoena attached and whatever else. Well, you can imagine what happened, which was the credit card processors cut them off and refused to process their credit cards. Now, here's the thing. You may say like, oh, that's a good, a good thing to do to these folks, right? Well, first of all, it's abominable if an attorney general is not prosecuting you criminally, but just suggesting that you are a criminal to private actors and asking them to behave as some sort of quasi-government enforcement arm because they're afraid of the government themselves. So that is, as you might imagine, a gross violation. But what's even worse, Tim, is that the credit card processing was actually in part implemented to guarantee that minors were not using the system and that it was trackable. So if you have an ad for someone, for instance, who was trafficked, which is the kind of gold standard of prosecution for one of these things, they don't want to prosecute people who seem to be, the closer it gets to, an older woman who is not under any pressure, who decides that she'd rather, sell access to her body than do some other job and is in private with it. That's the least favorable prosecution from the politician's perspective. And the most charitable prosecution, the one where they get to wrap themselves in the hero's cape more than anyone else, is a vulnerable trafficked person or child who's being trafficked. That's the sort of thing that gets them money, attention, votes, and again, letting them wear the hero's cape. Well, the credit card verification aided in discovering who may be involved in the worst possible behavior we can think of with respect to this kind of thing, like child trafficking. And so they actually took away a tool from law enforcement. Now, it'd be one thing if you said, well, gee, they weren't using those tools to help out law enforcement, but they were. The people who are the appointed politicians railed on Backpage because it made great press. They were able to hold themselves up.
I'm opposed to child sex trafficking, unlike my opponent.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
My opponent coddles those who would criminally traffic vulnerable, innocent children.
You're actually, you're better than that, young man, which is that you don't even mention the opponent. You just say, I am, like they aren't.
Yes,
like,
I
you don't
am,
even
right.
have to say there.
No,
now,
of
right?
course,
you just
you're
say,
right.
like,
yes, yeah.
I'm the candidate in this race who's against this awful thing, right?
Yes, yes, that's a really good
But here's the thing. The actual workaday DOJ attorneys that aren't politically appointed, that are just doing their job, wrote a memo that said these people shouldn't be prosecuted because they're an aid to actually prosecuting the people who are committing the crimes, so people who do traffic, because what they would do is they would cooperate with law enforcement and not cooperate in the sense of performing what's legally required of them. They actually had a preemptive program. Like if you see somebody that looks underage, contact law enforcement. And when in doubt, contact law enforcement, meaning like if it's on the margin where you think that person could be 18 or not. No, they actually had a policy for people who could be 21. And so if you're going to allow the advertising of anything remotely approaching sexual services, and that's what they did, and it is legal. By the way, prostitution is not illegal federally. It's illegal under almost all state laws, but federally you have to get to basically trafficking stuff if you want to get them. And that's why there was a second trial, Tim. The first trial was declared a mistrial because after repeated warnings, the DOJ kept talking about child sex trafficking and put on witnesses who were the parents. This one woman who was the parent of a young woman who was the victim of child sex trafficking. Now, the thing is, that had nothing to do with these guys or Backpage or anything like it. And so the judge said, listen, you can't just talk to the jury about child sex trafficking when people are on trial, not for child sex trafficking, because what happens is the outrage and, the jury wants to punish someone for this horrible thing this evidence that they've been presented with, and those are the defendants. And so it was so bad that they canceled the trial. Now, this guy's had to live for a better part of a decade under this cloud of being one of the worst human beings you can imagine. Kamala Harris prosecuted him in California as a pimp, and they threw out those prosecutions. And they used, by the way, just so you don't think it's all about dollars and cents in terms of the commercial advertising, they used the money to fund alternative media publications that did real, excellent, and hard-hitting journalism. And the reason why they are hounded to the ends of the earth by the prosecutors is they attacked politically important people. They went after, so they are Arizona-based. And I say they like they're still with us. And let's remember that Mr. Larkin took his own life on the eve of this second federal criminal trial. He's a father of 6, by the way. They say that he was a doting father and free speech, stalwart free speech advocate. He went after Joe Arpaio, and he went after John McCain for his wife's sweetheart drug plea deal thing. And so those were aligned against them. And they were arrested by Arpaio's forces, some of their investigative reporters. So a real First Amendment stalwart defender, and somebody who even the Justice Department says, please don't arrest them because they're helping us. They're helping us recover these actual criminals. And here's the other thing, and this just to me is so emblematic of we call it failure to engage in two-step thinking, right? Or, right. What are the unintended consequences of what we do? It used to be that Backpage was the most popular by a long shot place for not only legal ads that were offered for sale legal activities, but also illegal ones. And what that did was, if you did have a 16-year-old girl who is in LA and doing things that you wish she wouldn't, and you got to try to track her down and find her and save her, it used to be you could go to Backpage and maybe a centrally located place and find the person. And what happened was by shutting it down, they made 1,000 little Backpages that don't have that capacity. So it's harder than ever for, if we think of the most charitable case for taking this down is to protect the youngest, most vulnerable people in our society. And what they did hurts it. And hurts it in service of denigration of the fundamental rights of Mr. Lacey and Larkin. So we're keeping an eye on it, and I just think that
and they come
as
from
the outrage is about Trump's treatment on the criminal law. I want to try to leverage that for the millions of Americans who see it for what it is to say, listen, it's not just Trump. We have to make some serious changes about how we do prosecutions.
And these people who foist upon us this kind of argument, they presume that we accept they come from a place of high moral authority.
Yeah.
When in fact they don't. They have no moral authority. They have ceded that years ago with the way that they go after anybody who's basically a free market thinker. And, Trump just shot it up into orbit, into 5th gear or 8th gear, if that's possible. I think there are some 8 or 9 gear cars, aren't there, Scott?
Well, as the destruction of the 3-pedal cars proceeds apace, Tim, I don't even know how to count that high. But sad destruction. We're going to leave that math for next week. And thank you so much for your attendance on this week's podcast. And we'll see you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Scott.
Bye-bye.
We are the Uprising. Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement. for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, the Uprising podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.
That's it for this edition of The Uprising. Remember to hit Liberty Nation News for original articles, LN Radio, and our signature television program, The Conservative 5. Just go to libertynation.com on your browser or hit Rumble, YouTube, or check out our Liberty Nation News Roku channel. I'm Scott Cosenza. Thanks for joining The Uprising. This program is a production of libertynation.com, where truth is making a comeback.